The wake hall had the cold glow of a hospital kitchen. The white lamps made the flowers too pale and the faces too hard. The coffee, served in styrofoam cups, seemed to apologize for existing. I arrived early before the whispers gathered, but there were already too many people with the posture of those whose mourning was a public deed. A parish volunteer tried to adjust my veil without touching my skin. She smiled with her lips, not her eyes. I sat where there was room in the third row, and from there I watched the theater of occasional hugs, tears that knew when to fall, hands resting on shoulders like stamps. My father rested in the center, his tie slightly askew, his hands folded in a gesture I recognized from Sundays. The same rest after washing the car, when he'd stare at the sky as if reading instructions. I touched the rim of the coffin with my fingertips and felt the smooth, cool enamel. I wanted to straighten my tie, but the distance between me and the lid seemed far greater than the room could hold. The scent of lilies was strong, painfully sweet. On a table, a manila envelope bearing the seal of the lawyer's office breathed softly. My name was nowhere to be seen. His was in blue. The chairs in front were labeled family. An aunt called to me with what sounded like an invitation but was actually a direction. Here, my daughter, next to us. Or maybe at the end of the row, it'll be more comfortable. The older brother coordinated the flow of greetings like a doorman in an old building. He authorized, denied, pushed. When I got close, he offered me a glass of water that never reached my hand. A cousin complimented my dress as if it were a polite infraction. "You look so proper." Polite word to say out of place. The daughter-in-law gave me a kind smile, the kind that closes doors without a sound. "I'm so glad you came." The phrase in the right tone meant "too bad you came." The priest said little. My father liked objectivity. As the prayer progressed, I thought about the black notebook with a loose elastic band where he wrote down everything. Electricity bills, faucet repairs, medicine that ran out in the early hours. "Words fly, paper stays," he would say, smiling with the half of his face that rose first. I looked around and saw discreet cell phones, photographs taken with the volume turned down, rehearsed captions writing themselves in my head. Someone whispered strength on my shoulder, as if handing out a pamphlet. Strength, in their dictionary, meant accepting the corner of the room without dragging a chair. The ceiling fan creaked like old doors opening and closing. I counted the turns of the blades so as not to count the small humiliations that passed from hand to hand like table sweets. A man with a loose tie told me I was very well spoken. Another person commented that my tied-up hair enhanced the ambience. A scalpel's kindness. I swallowed hard and kept my spine straight, remembering the way my father would place the tape measure on the wood before cutting. First measure, then breathe, then decide. A snap signaled the lid was about to lower. The men chosen to hold the handles lined up like a graduation photo. I knew whose hands were missing. The ones who changed adult diapers without announcing it, the ones who picked up prescriptions at the clinic in the wee hours of the morning, the ones who held back vomit without embellishment. Mine remained suspended in mid-air until someone pushed the jar of holy water toward me, without touching my fingers. I made the sign of the cross slowly, letting my skin memorize the gesture. The metal latch clicked, and the room breathed differently, as if a period had been placed mid-sentence. The lawyer appeared through the side door with library-like steps. His gray suit, his glasses dull, the manila envelope now between his fingers. The conversation slowed, not out of respect, but out of calculation. He swept the room with a customary glance, the kind that confirms attendance on a list and avoids stories. When he passed me, his eyes hesitated for a second, as if recognizing a signature. Then they shifted. His brother met him with rehearsed haste, and the two exchanged phrases that sounded like instructions from a manual. "Tomorrow at the office. Document informal processes. Conditions foreseen." I memorized the rhythm, not the words. Gradually, the room filled with domestic sounds. Dishes stacked in the pantry, spoons clanging, hurried footsteps. My aunt came to say that everyone would go to her house later. For a snack, something simple, just the family. The last word was thorny, I nodded so as not to bleed in public. I returned to my seat and, for the first time, noticed that the mirror in the lid, now closed, didn't clearly reflect my features. Grief also blurs. The clock on the wall read 4:17 p.m. when a cold wind blew down the hallway. It came with a thin, sharp phrase, spoken at just the right pitch to bridge the gap between the first and third rows. I couldn't see the mouth that uttered it, only felt the eyes waiting for my reaction. The world seemed to shrink to a thin voice. You know, right? You're not getting anything. The Wake's corridor was narrow and long, covered in old tiles that reflected the glow of the lamps like blades. The air smelled of disinfectant and cheap perfume. Most people had already left, but the whispers lingered, echoing off the walls as if the building still wanted to chew over what it had heard. I leaned against the cold wall and watched the movement from afar. The chairs being stacked, the flowers gathered, the red carpet folded like a tired tongue. I stood there, motionless, trying to understand why the pain seemed less about death and more about what they were saying about me. My brother appeared at the end of the hallway, his suit wrinkled, his tie loose, but with the same air of someone who always believes he's in control. He walked with the slowness of someone rehearsing the tone of his words before hurting. "You need to be reasonable, Anna," he said in a firm whisper. Father wanted to maintain order. It's what he thought was fair. The word order stuck between us, with the same weight as the phrases that always came disguised as advice. "You're still young, you'll understand one day." Young. 52 years of work, of silence. And yet I was the child who needed to learn to accept. The stepmother approached soon after, impeccably folded handkerchief in hand, her face dry, and a voice so sweet it soured. "Your father loved you very much, but he knew how to separate things." The "but" came like a pair of scissors, cutting the sentence in half and the affection along with it. The cousin, always ready to agree with those with more power, added, "It's better to leave everything in the right hands, that way it doesn't become a mess." He smiled at me like someone offering poison in a crystal glass. I pretended not to hear. I breathed slowly and glanced at the table where the manila envelope still rested, now in the lawyer's hands. He was talking quietly to someone and looked uncomfortable, as if holding a secret too hot for his palms. When our eyes met, for a second, he hesitated. It wasn't pity nor surprise. It was recognition. I knew in that instant that my father had left more than silence. Her brother noticed the look and hurried to fill the space. "Tomorrow at 10, in the doctor's office." He spoke loudly, theatrically, so everyone could hear how in command he was. "It'll be quick, just formalities." Her aunt nodded, satisfied, and said something about following God's will. Someone behind her murmured that her father had always been a man of principle, and another added, "He knew who could be trusted." Each word seemed carefully chosen to elegantly exclude me. I walked to the exit but stopped at the door. The wind from the street carried the smell of rain and gasoline. Outside, the city remained alive, indifferent to the silent war that had just begun. I grabbed my phone and, on impulse, took a photo of the empty hall. The chairs lined up, the coffin already closed, the white cloth draped over the altar. It was just an image, but I knew. One day, all truth would begin like this, with a simple record. I heard footsteps approaching. The lawyer appeared beside me, his gaze still fixed on the envelope. "Ms. Anna," he asked formally, but his voice betrayed his concern. "Tomorrow at 10. Bring a document, and if possible, the birth certificate." He nodded. "My father's." He looked directly at me, and the pause told the story. "Yours." His words hung in the air, as if carrying physical weight. My brother watched from a distance, suspicious, trying to decipher what that brief exchange meant. And I knew, for the first time since the casket closed, that the game wasn't over. As I left, I heard my daughter-in-law whisper to her cousin, "She still thinks she's going to inherit something." Neither of them noticed I'd stopped in the middle of the hallway. I took a deep breath, let the laughter echo until it faded, and continued walking slowly with my head held high. Outside, the cold wind hit my face, and I pulled my coat tight. The asphalt was wet, reflecting the streetlights like a warped mirror. I walked without looking back. Each step was a silent promise. I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't explain. I would just show. If someone ever pushes you to the corner of the room and tells you you don't belong at the table, remember this. Some tables collapse with the first document. And the next day, when the lawyer opens his mouth, my father's voice will speak along with it. The lawyer's office was in the old city center, in a building with a yellow facade and tall windows, the kind of place where time seems to wear a suit. I arrived 10 minutes early, as my father always did when he wanted to show respect. The hallway smelled of old paper and cleaning alcohol, and the cold lights highlighted the worn shine of the wooden floor. I sat in the waiting room, taking in the details. The forgotten plant in a corner, the clock reading 9:50, the rhythmic sound of keys coming from another room. Every sound seemed part of a silent preparation. When the door opened, the brother was the first to enter, with long strides and an expression of someone who already knew the outcome. The stepmother followed close behind, clutching her purse to her chest as if protecting something that wasn't yet hers. The secretary called me last, with a brief, professional gesture. "Come in, Mrs. Anna." I took a deep breath and walked through the door, feeling the air change in temperature. The lawyer stood behind a desk cluttered with folders and stamps. He greeted us calmly, but there was a subtle tension in his hands, which organized papers as if each sheet were loaded with gunpowder. "Before we begin, I'd like to confirm everyone's identification." He collected the IDs and checked them one by one. When he took mine, he paused for a moment. He looked at the registration number, then at me, and nodded slowly like someone finding an old key in the right place. The reading began. The main will followed the same script as the wake. Formal, cold, predictable. Everything divided among the usual subjects. Each sentence was a polished stab. To the eldest son, the house on Rua das Amoras. To his wife, the joint investments. To his nephews, the land in a subdivision. I listened to the lawyer read, and something inside me closed. It was like watching a ceremonial erasure, only this time with a notarized signature. "There is, however, one observation," the lawyer said, cleaning his glasses with a handkerchief. The stepmother leaned forward, the brother cleared his throat. "Mr. Jose enclosed a note, dated 3 months before his death. The document is brief, but it is signed and notarized." He opened the envelope and read, with the neutral voice of someone who knows he's about to change the course of a story. "In case of disagreement, trust what's stored in the bank. Caution has a name." The silence that followed was heavy, almost palpable. The sentence seemed simple, but the meaning was a thread of fire. The brother tried to laugh. "It must be a figure of speech. Dad was full of those." The stepmother agreed too quickly. "He must have been confused. This illness messes with your head." The lawyer simply picked up the note and put it back in his briefcase, like protecting a seed before the rain. "The authenticity has been confirmed, ma'am. Same signature as the other documents." My eyes fixed on the blue letters of his name, firm, unwavering. It was the same line I saw in the notes in his black notebook, the same one he used when signing pharmacy receipts or birthday notes. That handwriting had more life than many of the people sitting there. I said nothing. I learned from him that silence, when charged with certainty, is worth more than speech. When the meeting ended, the lawyer discreetly called me to the door. "Ms. Anna, may I speak with you for a moment?" The brother pretended not to hear, but stood still, peering out of the corner of his eye. The lawyer lowered his voice. "There's another record linked to your father's name. I need to confirm the existence of a safe deposit box. If it's what I suspect, you should come with me." I nodded, my heart pounding but my face serene. "Tomorrow at 9. At the Central Bank." He simply said, "Bring the document Mr. Jose left for you." The one in his handwriting. As he left, his brother tried to control his tone, but anger seeped through the cracks. "I hope you don't make trouble. Dad trusted me." I stopped in front of him, looked him in the eye, and replied without raising my voice. "Yes, he did. But he wrote it." I left the building with the note clutched tightly in my purse. The cold late morning wind bit my face, but it was pleasant, a breath of fresh air. I walked to the bus stop and sat on the iron bench, watching the cars pass by. I opened the paper again, slowly reading the same words. Care has a name. And for the first time since the wake, I knew the name was mine. My aunt's house that night felt more like an extension of the wake than a home. The lights were yellow, the paintings were old, and the smell of reheated food mingled with my stepmother's expensive perfume. The table was set, with silverware lined and deep plates, but no one was actually eating. It was a reenactment of family togetherness, and I was the foreign body on stage. I picked up the pen and wrote a short letter to myself, folding it and putting it inside the notebook. Remember what he taught you. Calmness is not weakness. It's strategy. Morning arrived with a shy sun. I made coffee, sat at the table and took a deep breath. For a moment I thought about giving up. But then I remembered his words and my stepmother's voice saying, "He knew how to separate things." Yes, he did. And he did. He left me what no one else could claim, the evidence. As the steam rose from the coffee, I felt the need to talk to someone, even if it was someone who was listening now. If you've been through this, if they took what was yours and called it justice, write it down here, I thought aloud, as if speaking to a mirror. Write so that others don't remain silent. The sun was already beating down on the windows as I closed the manila envelope that now bore my own signatures and his. I placed my hand on the lid, took a deep breath and whispered, "Father, caring has a name." And in that moment, amid the ticking of the clock and the timid birdsong outside, I realized something inside me had turned a corner. I was no longer seeking acceptance. I was building proof. On the last line of the notebook, the father had written, "If they try to erase it, rewrite it." And that's exactly what I did. The bank had the silence of a modern temple. Cold, impersonal, made of marble and glass. People spoke softly, footsteps echoed on the polished floor, and the air conditioning seemed to whisper a constant warning. Here emotion has no place. I arrived early, clutching my manila folder to my chest. The security guard greeted me with a mechanical wave, without making eye contact. I walked to the reception desk and showed the document the lawyer had asked me to bring. The attendant, a young woman in a blue blazer, read the paper, frowned and radioed someone. The manager appeared minutes later, a gray-haired man with a formal smile and a voice trained to sound cordial. "Are you Mr. Jose's daughter?" He nodded. He examined the signature on the document and nodded. "The doctor is coming. Please wait a moment." I sat in a leather armchair, watching the comings and goings of customers who seemed to float in their own worlds. I remembered the afternoons my father and I would go to the bank together. He'd let me sign the deposit slips saying, "Your name is the first asset you register." And now I was there, about to prove that his had never left me out. The lawyer arrived promptly at 9:30, wearing the same gray suit from the wake, but now with a softer, almost complicit expression. "Let's open the safe," he said, with the calm of someone announcing a ritual. The manager led us through a reinforced glass door and down a narrow hallway. The air there was different, denser, smelling of metal and disinfectant. We descended 3 flights of stairs to a small room lit by fluorescent lights. Rows of safes lined the walls like cemetery drawers. The sound of a bunch of keys jingling in the manager's hand broke the silence. "Here it is. Safe 127, registered to Mr. Jose, with joint access to the lawyer." He inserted the key and turned it slowly. A metallic click echoed through the room. Inside were 3 items: a blue-covered notebook, a clear folder, and a small metal case. The lawyer carefully removed everything and placed it on the table. The air seemed to change weight. The notebook was in good condition, with worn edges and the familiar smell of old paper. I touched the cover and felt the same chill as the day of the funeral. I opened it to the first page. It was his handwriting, firm, methodical, unmistakable. Lists of expenses, dates, notes about medications and appointments. But between the lines, short sentences that seemed written for me. Proof attached. I pay for Anna. Hand delivered. It was as if he had transformed every care into proof, every gesture into a document. The transparent folder held certified copies, bank transfers, receipts, deposit slips, all signed and stamped by him. In the corner of one of the sheets, a note in blue. Register to her account if I can't. I felt my hands tremble. The lawyer read silently, then looked at me with a mixture of respect and surprise. He left everything tied together. No detail was left to chance. I picked up the small metal case. Inside were 2 antique rings, kept as heirlooms. One was his, the other my mother's, dead for over 20 years. Beneath the rings was a folded photo. He and I were painting the wall of our house. Both of us covered in paint, smiling. On the back was a short note, to remember that what is built together cannot be erased. I closed my eyes for a moment. My breath became shallow, and the sound of the air conditioning seemed to fade. I was no longer in a bank room. I was back in my backyard, the sun beating down and the sun laughing as I smeared the ground blue. The lawyer cleared his throat, bringing me back. These documents are sufficient to validate the addendum and prove your direct contribution. We'll register everything today. He stacked the sheets, placed them in the folder, and sealed them with a rubber band. You understand what this means, don't you? I nodded, unable to speak. Yes, I understood. It wasn't about money. It was about presence. About being remembered as part of a story they tried to rip away from me. As we climbed the stairs, the lawyer commented in a more personal tone. Your father trusted you a lot. He left a legacy of method, not fighting. It's rare. I smiled, still unable to release the lump in my throat. Outside, the late morning sun beat down on the glass facade. The building's reflection gave me an image I barely recognized. A woman holding aloft a blue briefcase like someone carrying a silent trophy. The lawyer shook my hand. Now, Anna, the paper speaks for you. And in that instant I understood. I no longer needed to scream. The noise of truth, when written, is deafening. I returned home with my body tired and my mind boiling. The heat of the street seemed to melt my skin, but what really burned was the feeling that everything was finally beginning to fall into place. I closed the door, left my briefcase on the table, and sat in the living room chair. The silence of the house, which had previously oppressed me, now felt like a well-deserved break. I took a deep breath and let my head rest against the headrest. It was time to do what my father admired most about me. Organize. I spread the safe's contents out on the table, as if I were putting together a puzzle. Each piece of paper had its place. Receipts, certified copies, photos, notes. The afternoon light streamed through the curtain, creating golden rectangles on the documents. It was beautiful to see how care could also have form. I grabbed a pen and a notepad and began to piece together the timeline. I put colored post-its to mark the phases. Hospital, transfers, will, safe next to each step. I jotted down dates, times, and small observations. With each revised page, my heart beat faster. The plan was being born there, in calm and patience, 2 things racism always tries to take from us. As I wrote, I remembered the times people told me I was too intense, difficult to deal with, spoke with too much authority for my position. In that moment, I understood. Everything they tried to use to belittle me was now saving me. I was intense, yes. Persistent, detail-oriented, strategic. And that table covered in evidence was the perfect reflection of that. I opened my laptop and scanned every document. I saved copies to the cloud, emailed them to myself, and put them all on a flash drive. I named the folders with the same precision as my father. Evidence. Next, I created a file with a discreet, unobtrusive name. Personal Report 2023 inside. I described everything. Dates, speeches, gestures, disguised insults, complicit silences. Each line was a mirror that reflected the injustice clearly. As I worked, I heard the noise from the street. The bread vendor, a child laughing, the distant roar of an engine. Everything was normal, but inside me, the world had already turned upside down. I was no longer the humiliated daughter at the wake, but the woman patiently preparing the tray. I closed my eyes for a moment and pictured my father's face. I remembered the time he'd silently fixed a crooked shelf. Impatiently I asked, "Why don't you call someone to help?" He replied, "Because sometimes help gets in the way of the plumb line." At the time I laughed, not understanding. Now it made sense. That evening, I sat at the table with a glass of water and a fresh notebook. At the top of the page I wrote, "Wool plan, a simple name, yet full of meaning. Wool is silent, soft, almost fragile, and yet it protects from the cold." That's how I wanted to act. Without fuss, without haste, but firm. List the steps. Consolidate all evidence. Confirm the registration of the addendum at the notary's office. Gather witnesses to the care, the neighbor, the nurse, the pharmacy delivery person. Request the presence of a lawyer at the family meeting. The plan wasn't revenge. It was reparation. I didn't want to destroy anyone, just show what was always there, but which they pretended not to see. When I finished, I closed the notebook and stared at the reflection of the lamp on the table. The glow trembled as if breathing. And then my phone vibrated, interrupting the silence. It was a notification in the family group. "Meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. with the lawyer. Attendance mandatory." He smiled. His brother was trying to control the narrative as always. Little did he know that the plot no longer belonged to him. I got up, carefully put the papers away, and turned out the lights. In the living room mirror, I saw half of my own face. Firm, tired, but alive. I touched the glass and murmured, almost like a prayer, "Dad, the plumb line is right. Now just stand the table upright." And for the first time in days, I slept without fear of waking up. The 5 o'clock sun was tinging the sky copper when I arrived at the office. The building looked the same, but the air was different, dense, charged with expectation. At the entrance, I waved to the security guard and walked slowly upstairs, my heart beating to the rhythm of a muffled drum. The elevator rose with a metallic rumble, each floor a step closer to the confrontation that awaited me. When the door opened, I took a deep breath and walked to the meeting room. The voices came from inside, low and controlled. I opened the door and saw everyone there, arranged around the table as if in a ceremony of power. The brother, the stepmother, 2 cousins, each with their own rehearsed expression. The lawyer was standing near the window, his briefcase over his arm. He greeted me with a slight nod, without revealing what he knew. I sat in the same place as at the wake, at the end of the table. The brother, as always, in the center. He looked comfortable, as if he believed he controlled the plot. The lawyer opened the file slowly, letting the silence grow. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Today we will read the addendum left by Mr. Jose, as well as present new documents found in a bank safe." A murmur of surprise ran through the table. The stepmother adjusted her handkerchief, and the brother let out a suppressed laugh. "Ah, so the safe really existed," he said ironically. The lawyer ignored the tone and continued. "Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that everything here is authenticated and dated. Each document is notarized and digitally registered." The faces around them changed imperceptibly. The brother's laughter faded, and the stepmother's fingers tightened their grip on the handkerchief. As he organized the sheets, I looked at the scene and realized how rehearsed the performance was. The long table, the beige tablecloth, the lined glasses, symbols of a formality they'd always used to belittle me. But now it was different. I was no longer a spectator. I was an author. The lawyer began reading. "The addendum confirms the existence of a secondary safe deposit box, in which Mr. Jose deposited documents and records demonstrating Mrs. Anna's direct contribution to his care, medical expenses, and the management of his personal assets." The words echoed slowly, precisely. Direct contribution. I could almost hear the sound of the masks cracking. The stepmother, trying to regain control, smiled. "Ah, doctor, you know how sentimental he was. He must have been fragile when he wrote that." The lawyer looked up firmly. The addendum was written 3 months before his death, with witnesses and a medical report confirming full lucidity. With each sentence, the ground beneath them gave way a little more. My brother leaned forward, his face rigid. This is a farce. Father would never give her decision-making power. The lawyer replied calmly. His words are here. And Ms. Anna has been named co-manager of a personal fund. The silence that followed was almost physical. The entire room seemed to hear the sound of its own breathing. The stepmother was the first to break the silence. That's unfair. I was a wife for 20 years. I looked at her calmly and said softly, and I was a daughter all my life. She looked away. The lawyer continued impassive. The document also stipulates that any attempt to contest the decision must be made through legal means, under penalty of nullity. I watched my brother's face. Sweat was beginning to appear on his forehead, discreet but visible. He fidgeted with his fingers restlessly. That man, so confident in his own authority, now seemed small before a simple piece of paper. As the lawyer explained the final clauses, I felt something inside me open. It wasn't revenge. It was space. The same space they denied me at the wake, at the table, in the house, in conversations. Now it was mine, earned with patience and trial. I looked at the lawyer and on impulse said, "Doctor, before I continue, may I say something?" He nodded. I turned to the motionless faces before me. My father always taught me that those who speak too loudly fear being contradicted. So let the papers do the talking. They don't lie. The brother opened his mouth to respond, but the lawyer held up his hand, interrupting. "We're not finished yet." He walked over to the file. In addition to the addendum, Mr. Jose left an audio-visual file, recorded at the hospital, with additional instructions. The sentence hung in the air like thunder. The stepmother's eyes widened. "A video?" The lawyer nodded. "Yes. And it will be shown now." The sound of the computer turning on filled the room. The lights dimmed, and the image began to appear on the screen. My father's face, thin but lucid, his eyes steady. I felt the air leave my lungs. As the video loaded, I looked around and thought, if someone you love has ever been silenced, share this story, because sometimes the truth just needs a willing audience. And then his voice echoed. If you're seeing this, it's because paper alone wasn't enough. The image shook slightly, as if the camera had been placed on a tray. Even so, his face was clear, thin, pale, but with lively eyes. The hospital room was lit by a cold light, the white sheet up to his chest, the clock showing 5:32 p.m. He took a deep breath before speaking, and each word seemed to cross time and meet me face to face. "If you're seeing this," he began, "it's because paper alone wasn't enough. I've always believed that the truth needs to be spoken, not just written." The stepmother pressed the handkerchief to her face. The brother leaned back in his chair, trying to hide his discomfort. The lawyer said nothing. I kept my eyes fixed on the screen, motionless. His voice, weakened but sure, continued. "Anna took care of me when I no longer remembered to take care of myself. She gave me what no role could demand, presence. And presence is also a legacy." With each sentence, the room seemed to shrink. The sound of the heart monitor in the background matched the heavy breathing of those around me. I made a point of recording everything because I know the world as it is, and I know how much skin color changes the value of a signature. The stepmother lowered her head. Her brother looked away, now visibly tense. My father coughed on the video, took a sip of water and continued. "If anyone tries to disprove what's on the paper, show this video. And if you still doubt it, remember that care has a name. And that name is hers." The video ended with the sound of the nurse opening the door. The image froze on his face, the same discreet smile he gave me when he wanted to say, "It's going to be okay." The silence afterward was unbearable. No one moved. The lawyer slowly closed his laptop, letting the echo of his last words linger in the air. My brother was the first to break his silence. That's emotional manipulation. He was sick, he didn't know what he was saying. His voice trembled, but he tried to sound firm. The lawyer responded with cutting calm. The video was recorded on the same day Mr. Jose signed the addendum, in the presence of 2 witnesses and the notary. The registration is fully valid. The stepmother shook her head in despair. He was always fair. He couldn't have done this to me. The lawyer just leaned back in his chair. He did. And he signed it. As they argued, I stared at the reflection in the window. Outside, the sun was setting, tinting the glass gold. My own reflection returned a look I didn't recognize. It was no longer that of a silenced daughter. It was that of someone who had survived a sentence. "This is a scam," the brother insisted. "You influenced him." I stared at him unblinkingly. Yes, I did. With loyalty. With presence. With love. The same things you called weakness. The room fell silent. He tried to hold my gaze, but it was quickly diverted. The lawyer stood up and began gathering the documents. "The redistribution will be made according to the addendum and the video. The signature and registration have already been notarized." The brother huffed, the stepmother crying without tears. Mr. Jose left clear instructions regarding the disclosure of the truth, including to the press, in case of any dispute. The sentence fell like a stone. They looked at each other, startled. "He wanted it to be public," the lawyer said. "He wanted everyone to see the value of those who care." I took the folded note from my purse and placed it on the table. "My father left me this too," I said, opening it slowly. The blue letters danced in the light. "Don't discuss, record." I looked at each of them. "He taught me not to waste time trying to convince those who pretend not to see. That's why I recorded everything." The lawyer nodded. "She recorded what needed to be recorded. All the documents and the video are now part of the case." I stood up, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. The table, once a scene of humiliation, now seemed like an altar. I looked at the lawyer. "It's done, isn't it?" He replied, "It's done, Mrs. Anna. And it's final." The stepmother was still trying to say something, but her voice was lost in the air. Her brother remained still, his hands over his face, his fingers pressed against his temples. As I passed him, I smelled the same disinfectant smell from the wake. And for a second, I thought it might be the very air of justice washing away what was left. At the door, I stopped and turned to the group. My father believed that true justice is silent. And today it just spoke. I left, leaving behind the sound of scraping chairs and the muffled sound of sobbing. The hallway was empty, lit only by yellowish bulbs. I took a deep breath and walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, I realized that, for the first time, the mirror's reflection didn't reflect a wounded woman. He returned an heiress. The next morning I woke before the sun. My body felt light, but my mind throbbed with the residue of the previous day. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to the distant sound of birds and the drip of the kitchen faucet. For the first time in weeks, the silence of the house didn't feel like absence, it felt like presence. My father was still there, scattered in the things he'd left behind, in the words he'd left behind, in the way the wind moved the curtains. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the table. The mug was steaming in my hands when my cell phone vibrated. It was the lawyer. "Good morning, Ms. Anna." The bank confirmed the opening and authenticity of the registration. "The video has been attached to the case, and the inventory is being reviewed. They will be officially notified soon." His tone was calm, confident. "You won." Took me a few seconds to respond. Winning, the word sounded strange. It didn't sound like victory, it sounded like reparation. "Thank you, doctor." He paused. "Your father would be proud." His voice cracked a little at the end. I hung up, and the click of the phone seemed to seal the cycle. I spent the rest of the morning tidying the house. Every object seemed to carry a different color now. The photos on the shelf, the stopped clock. His coat still hanging on the hanger. I touched the fabric, and the smell, a mix of soap and tool oil, made me smile. "It's done, Dad," I murmured. In the middle of the afternoon, while sweeping the yard, my phone dinged again. It was a group message notification. "Did you see the story?" It was in the newspaper. I opened the link with trembling hands. The headline read, Video of will exposes family dispute and acknowledges care for neglected daughter. The text was respectful, almost restrained, but it was enough. It was enough because now the world knew. "It's all finalized, Mrs. Anna," he said, handing over the blue folder. "The fund has been officially registered, and your father's name now holds the title to the care grants you will manage." His voice trembled slightly, perhaps with emotion, perhaps with relief. "And, according to the final clause, you are solely responsible for coordinating the project." I picked up the pen and signed, feeling the weight of the ink dripping down the paper. The sound of the scratch was clear, almost solemn. It was the same gesture I'd seen my father repeat so many times. Focused, patient, as if drawing a bridge between what was and what will be. The difference was that this time the signature was mine. The lawyer extended his hand. "Your father believed in the written truth. And you became a testament to that." He smiled. "He believed in me. All it took was a piece of paper to remind me." I left the building with the sun beating down on my face. The reflection from the glass facade reflected my entire image, uncut, unshadowed. For the first time I saw myself complete. Without needing validation, without fear of taking up space. The heir to what he left, and to what I myself had built. On the sidewalk, the journalist who had covered the case was waiting for me. "Ms. Anna, one last statement for the reporter. What does all this mean to you?" I thought for a moment, looked up at the sky and replied, "It means that kindness is not weakness, it's strategy. And that justice is not revenge. It's memory that refuses to die." He wrote it down, thanked me, and I continued walking. On the way, I bought flowers. Yellow chrysanthemums, the ones he liked. I took them to the cemetery, walked among the tombstones until I found his name engraved in the cold stone. I left the bouquet and sat on the ground, as if visiting someone alive. "Father," I whispered. The paper spoke. And the world listened. I closed my eyes and let the wind touch my face. For a moment, I swear I smelled him, soap, polish and sun. When I returned home, the backyard welcomed me with the sound of birds and the sweet scent of jabuticabas. The chairs were set, the group air voices gathered under the shade of the tree. Women of different ages, tired smiles and attentive eyes. "Shall we begin?" I asked, and they all nodded. I spoke about the fund, about the legacy, about transforming pain into a path. I told them that the project's name carried the same purpose as what my father taught me, to record what the world tries to erase. As I spoke, I noticed the wind blowing hard, scattering leaves across the ground like confetti. It was as if he were there, participating in the meeting. Finally, I closed the blue notebook on the table. "They said I wouldn't take anything," I said, looking at the group. "But I took everything that mattered. My name, my voice, and the right to tell this story." The women clapped softly, a soft, reverent sound. I looked around. The sun was streaming through the branches, painting every face with light. I took the pen and wrote on the last page of the notebook. "The legacy is simple. To prove that kindness is not submission and that justice, when it comes from black hands, is even more luminous." I closed the notebook and took a deep breath. I felt the solid ground beneath my feet, the warm breeze on my face, and my heart at peace. The story was complete. I stood up, looked at the group and said with a smile, "If this story gave you strength, stay with me. Subscribe not to the channel but to life. Because every time one of us speaks, the whole world listens a little better." And when the sun set, illuminating the yard in shades of gold and shadow, I knew. The cycle was complete, but the legacy, that had just begun. The neighbor called out to me from the gate, holding a folded newspaper. "Is that you, Anna?" I nodded awkwardly. She smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Your father always said that justice is for those who wait with dignity. I think he knew." I went back inside and sat on the couch, reading every line of the article. There were no attacks, no gratuitous exposure. Just facts. The video, the receipts, the evidence. And a final sentence that gave me chills. "Care is also heritage." The phone rang. This time, an unfamiliar number. It was her brother. His voice sounded different, without the usual arrogance, but with a weariness I recognized. Anna. I wanted to say that. Maybe we overdid it. Waited. He continued. I didn't know Dad had done all that. The pause on the other end was heavy. We just wanted to keep what was his. And I just wanted to uphold what he believed was right, I replied. You don't need to thank me or apologize. Just understand. I didn't fight against you. I fought for myself. He sighed, a sound somewhere between surrender and shame. I hope you can move on in peace. I am, I said. And I hung up. After the call, I stared out the window at the sky. The clouds formed soft patterns, and for a moment, I thought I saw the outline of his face. A trick of the light, perhaps, but enough. That night, the lawyer called me again. The press wants to do an interview. They want to know about the video, about the meaning of the legacy. I laughed softly. There's nothing to explain. It's simple. My father always wrote what he felt. I just read it out loud. Do you want me to refuse for you? He asked. Thought for a moment. No. Let them publish it. Let them see what happens when a black woman stops asking permission to exist. I hung up and went out into the backyard. The sky was clear, the air warm. I sat on the stairs and listened to the night sounds. Crickets, the wind, the neighbor's dog. I opened the blue notebook and wrote. They said silence was my place. Little did they know that silence is the sound of strategy. I closed the notebook and stood there, my heart light and my hands serene. The house breathed with me. Inside, the phone vibrated again. This time, a flood of messages from strangers. Women, most of them. Thank you for not giving up. My mother went through this. You spoke for us. I read them one by one, my eyes welling up. There on that porch I realized. What began as an inheritance had become an echo. And my father's voice finally was mine. The days that followed felt unreal, as if I were walking on a freshly washed floor. Clean but still damp, reflecting what had been left behind. The house was different, not on the outside but on the inside. Even the air seemed to breathe with me. I would wake early, open the windows, and let the sun in, flooding the walls with new light. The family's voices had faded, but the silence was now a form of respect. No phone calls, no messages. Just the sound of the wind, the smell of coffee, and the feeling that, for the first time, time owed me a kindness. The lawyer sent me an email with the simple subject line. Process closed. Inheritance redistributed as per addendum. I read it 3 times, not out of doubt, but for pleasure. Each word was a crack in the old wall of denial. Victory didn't come with fireworks, it came with a stamp, a date, and public recognition. My father would have smiled that half smile of his, the one that appeared whenever right finally triumphed over expediency. Across the street, I saw my neighbor waving the folded newspaper in her hand. It's out again, Anna. Look at this. The headline now read, Daughter who cared for her father wins competition and creates support project for forgotten women. The news told about the group I had started without pretense, the same one that had been born in backyard conversations, under the jabuticaba tree. I had called it Air Voices. The name came by itself, as if it had been breathed by him. The meetings began small. 4, then 8 women, all with similar stories. Erased wills, inherited silences, broken promises. None of them wanted pity. They wanted instruction, proof, a record. The sound of their conversations was harsh but lively. When one of them said her family called her, the one left, I felt an old pang inside me. You weren't left, I told her. You resisted. And resistance is also inheritance. The weeks passed and the group grew. Journalists, lawyers, caregivers, and teachers joined. Each meeting ended with a phrase that became almost a ritual. Trust the paper, but first trust yourself. And every time I said that, I felt my father sitting there, invisible, with that look of someone who approves without needing to speak. One afternoon, a young woman in her 20s appeared at the gate. Dark skin, hair tied in a hasty bun, a crumpled folder in her hands. Are you Mrs. Anna? He nodded. I found some of my grandfather's papers. I think they erased my mother's name. I invited her in, poured coffee, and she began to tell me. The story was familiar, the exclusion masquerading as formality. I picked up the document and saw the same pattern as always. A misplaced signature, a crooked stamp, a suspicious date. "Is there a way?" she asked, her eyes welling up. "Yes," I replied. "But it takes patience. And paper." She laughed awkwardly and I added, "Racism loves improvisation. What kills it is proof." She actually laughed this time, a laugh that seemed to fill the room. When she left, I sat on the porch and looked out at the yard. The jabuticabas were ripe, heavy with purple. I picked one, wiped it on the hem of my skirt, and ate it slowly. The taste was the same as always, sweet at first, sour at the end, a perfect reminder of justice. That same day the lawyer called me. "Anna, the fund in your father's name has been approved. It will be called the Jose Almeida Foundation, a scholarship and care program. You are the main manager." I was silent for a while. He wanted his name to be remembered with dignity. Now it will be. I hung up and stared at the sky, which was beginning to change color. A light wind rustled the leaves, and the sound of children playing in the street brought me back to my childhood. My father calling me from inside the house, his laughter, the way he said, "Hurry up, girl, dinner's going to get cold." I smiled to myself, my heart at peace. He was right all along. Justice, when it comes slowly, comes to stay. I went in, washed my hands, and in the blue notebook I wrote. They tried to reduce me to a footnote. I became the preface to another story. On the next page I drew a simple line like a signature. And below I wrote mine. 2 lines that now met in the same space. Side by side, without hierarchy, without shadow. The inheritance was complete. And finally fair. The morning the lawyer called me to sign the closing document, the sky was clear, and the air smelled of a new beginning. I walked slowly to his office, feeling the wind play with my hair, and realized that my body, previously tense, now moved with a new lightness, as if each step untied another old knot. When I entered, he greeted me with that discreet smile of someone who knows they're witnessing the end of something great.